The billionaire's voice echoed through the empty mansion. "Make it through tonight in my house," he said, "and I'll set you free." No one ever told her what that meant. By sunrise, she'd wish she never found out. Before we begin, let me know in the comment section where you're watching from. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and like this video. The smell of lemon polish and bleach clung to Nia Brooks' skin no matter how many times she scrubbed. It followed her through every hallway of the Mercer estate, a house so clean it looked like no one actually lived there. The marble floors reflected her face in ghostly fragments. Floor-to-ceiling windows turned the night outside into an ocean of shifting shadows, and the Pacific waves crashed far below like something ancient and angry. Her sneakers squeaked softly as she crossed the gallery, bucket in hand. She winced at the sound. In a house like this, even a breath felt too loud. "Don't linger in the study," the head housekeeper had warned before clocking out. "And if Mr. Mercer's really back, don't speak unless spoken to. He doesn't like noise." Nia had nodded, but inside she'd rolled her eyes. People said a lot of things about Elias Mercer, that he'd built empires, buried enemies, and turned grief into ice. That his fortune was as cold as the man himself. The tabloids had nicknamed him the Ice King, which was dramatic, but maybe fitting for someone who'd locked himself away for years after losing his wife and son. She'd half expected him to be a myth, some recluse who'd never come back to this cliffside mausoleum. But tonight, something in the air felt awake. Thunder grumbled in the distance. The chandeliers swayed, scattering shards of light across the walls. For a moment, Nia imagined she could hear the heartbeat of the house itself. Slow, watchful, waiting. She rubbed her fingers together. They were raw from scrubbing, the skin around her nails permanently tinted with the sting of cleaning chemicals. She thought of her mother's last hospital bill, still unpaid despite every double shift. $2,000 left. 2,000 and she could finally stop pretending she wasn't tired. The grandfather clock struck 11. Nia sighed, dipping her rag into the bucket. The other maids had gone hours ago. She was only covering the night shift because Sharon had called in sick. "Just wipe the study," Sharon had texted. "It's easy money. He's never home." Easy, sure. Lightning flashed through the glass walls, throwing the estate's interior into stark relief. The art, the symmetry, the kind of wealth that made even time feel expensive. Nia pushed open the double doors to the study. The air was colder there. Books lined the walls in precise order, untouched. A massive desk faced the storm, and above the fireplace hung a painting, an oil portrait of a woman and a child. The brushstrokes were tender, full of warmth the rest of the house seemed to reject. She hesitated, then bent to wipe the marble baseboard. Her bucket wobbled. The mop handle slipped from her fingers, knocking the edge of the desk. Water sloshed up and splattered across the painting. Nia froze. A single bead of soapy water rolled down the canvas, blurring the child's smile. "Oh, God!" She grabbed her rag and reached up, dabbing frantically at the streak. The fabric caught on the corner of the frame, ripping it from its hinge. The painting hit the floor. The glass shattered. The sound was deafening. Thunder cracked in response, rattling the chandelier overhead. And then she wasn't alone. From the far corner of the room, a low voice said, "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Nia turned, every muscle locking in place. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, still in his rain-damp coat. His presence filled the space like gravity, pulling the air out of the room. Elias Mercer. His eyes were a color she didn't know how to name, somewhere between cold steel and a storm waiting to happen. I didn't mean." He raised a hand, silencing her. He knelt beside the fallen frame, his expression unreadable. His fingers brushed the edge of the ruined glass, then paused over the child's face as if touching a ghost. When he finally looked up, The weight of his stare nearly broke her. "Everyone who steps into this room is told not to touch anything," he said quietly. "You're new." "Yes, sir," she managed, covering the night shift. He stood, slow and deliberate, as though deciding whether to end her right there. "What's your name?" "Nia. Nia Brooks." He repeated it once, testing the syllables. Then, without looking away, he said, "Make it through tonight in my house, Miss Brooks, and I'll set you free." The words hung in the air, sharp as the lightning flashing outside. She blinked. "Free from what, sir?" "From everything." He took a step closer. "Your debt. Your contracts. The quiet little cage you've built around yourself. One night. That's all." She swallowed hard. The storm outside was growing louder now, rain hammering against the glass walls. "And if I don't?" she whispered. He smiled faintly, a cruel, beautiful thing. "Then you'll learn what it costs to disobey me." Nia's pulse thudded in her throat. "I don't understand." "You will." Mercer crossed to the door and turned the lock. The metallic click echoed through the study like a verdict. Nia stepped back. "Wait, why are you locking it?" He ignored the question, lighting the fireplace instead. The flames caught instantly, throwing a glow across his face, cutting sharp angles into the hollows beneath his eyes. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the sideboard and set one in front of her. "Sit," he ordered. I shouldn't." "Sit." Her legs obeyed before her mind could protest. Mercer took the seat opposite, watching her over the rim of his glass. "You want to be free? Earn it." "I already work double shifts, sir." "I don't." "I'm not talking about work." He leaned forward, his tone dropping to something that made her skin prickle. "You'll stay awake until dawn. You'll do as I say. No questions, no refusals. If you make it through the night, you walk out of here debt-free. If you don't—" He let the sentence die there, unfinished but heavy. Nia stared into the flames, heart pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. The firelight flickered against the storm-swept glass, reflecting her face. Small, uncertain, trembling, and his behind it, unmoving, unreadable. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Mercer rose, his shadow stretching long across the marble. "Those are the rules, Miss Brooks. Stay awake. Obey. Survive." He turned toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The rest," he said softly, "you'll learn before sunrise." Behind him, the storm broke in full force, wind and rain and the first crack of something larger than fear. And for the first time, Nia wondered if she'd just agreed to something she might not survive. The fire crackled, throwing gold against glass and stone, but the storm outside still claimed the louder voice. Rain lashed the walls in rhythmic fury, each strike against the Mercer estate like a warning that the night was only beginning. Nia Brooks sat where Elias Mercer had left her, perched on the edge of a leather chair, hands clasped tight in her lap. The warmth of the flames didn't reach her bones. She was aware of every sound, the steady tick of the grandfather clock, the creak of the storm pressing against the windows, the faint clink as Mercer refilled his glass. He hadn't spoken since declaring the rules. Stay awake. Obey. Survive. When he finally did, his tone was almost conversational, as though this were an interview rather than a sentence. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Brooks." Her throat felt dry. "There's not much to tell, sir." "Then start with the parts you don't want to say." She hesitated. Was this what he meant by a test? "I'm from Atlanta," she said carefully. "Been here in California for a year. I clean houses mostly. Big ones like this." "Do you enjoy it?" "No one enjoys cleaning someone else's mess." "And yet here you are." She looked at him, really looked. The firelight made him seem older and younger all at once. The lines near his mouth spoke of exhaustion, but his posture was pure control, each movement deliberate. He reminded her of the house, beautiful, impossible, and built to keep things out. "Why cleaning?" he pressed. "You strike me as smarter than that." She bristled. "Smarter doesn't always pay the bills." "Bills," he repeated. "You mean your mother's hospital debt." Her stomach lurched. "How do you?" "I make it my business to know who's under my roof," he said calmly. "I know about the payment plan. The younger sister's still in school. The overdraft fees." He sipped his drink. "Desperation has a scent, Miss Brooks. Most of my staff wear it." Nia's pulse hammered. Shame rose in her chest, hot and choking. She wanted to speak, but the words tangled. He watched her silently for a moment, then said, "You're angry." "I'm tired," she corrected. "Tired of what?" She exhaled. "Working twice as hard to stay broke. Pretending it's my fault." He studied her, expression unreadable. "You think the world owes you more?" "I think the world owes everyone a fair shot," she said quietly. "And freedom?" he asked. "Do you believe in that?" The word hung between them like smoke. "Freedom's just a word," she said after a pause. "Rich people use it for options they already have." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite anger. Something human cracked through the ice for a moment before vanishing again. "That's bold." "It's true. Most people lie to me when I ask them questions like that." "Maybe they can afford to." Her voice was steady now. Something inside her, something small but fierce, had started to push back against the fear. She realized that this, whatever this was, wasn't about obedience. He wasn't testing whether she'd flinch. He was testing what she'd say when she didn't. Mercer set his glass down with deliberate precision. The clink echoed through the study. "So tell me, Miss Brooks, what does freedom look like to you?" She hesitated, then said, "Not owing anyone anything. Not having to trade my hours or my body or my silence to survive." He tilted his head slightly, as if memorizing the shape of her words. "And yet, here you are. Trading both." Her jaw tightened. "What about you, Mr. Mercer? What does freedom look like to someone who already has everything?" He didn't answer right away. The flames threw their reflection in his eyes, a flicker of light swallowed by shadow. "It looks like peace," he said at last. "And it never lasts." For a long moment neither spoke. The storm had grown louder, wrapping the house in the roar of wind and water. The candlelight wavered, throwing their faces into sudden halves of light and dark. Nia tried to steady her breathing. Every question felt like a wire pulled tighter between them, straining toward something unseen. Then Mercer said softly, "You remind me of someone." Her brow furrowed. "Who?" "Someone who used to tell me the truth. Before I stopped listening." He stood and crossed to the window. Lightning flashed behind him, turning his silhouette into something mythic. Half man, half memory. "Do you know why this house was built like this?" he asked without turning. "Glass walls, open rooms, everything visible. I thought transparency meant control. That if I could see everything, nothing could surprise me." He looked over his shoulder, his eyes sharp again. "But it doesn't work that way. You can't see yourself in glass when the light's too bright." Nia didn't know what to say. She felt like she was being shown something she wasn't supposed to see, an unguarded glimpse through the armor of the man they called the Ice King. "You built a house to trap yourself," she murmured before she could stop herself. The air shifted. He turned fully now, his gaze pinning her. "Careful, Miss Brooks." She swallowed. "It's just an observation." You think I'm the one trapped? I think people with walls this high always are. For a heartbeat, she thought he might throw her out, or worse. But then something unexpected happened. He laughed, a rough, startled sound that didn't belong to the man in the headlines. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The clock ticked between them, counting down to something neither could name. Mercer poured another drink, this time without offering her one. "Most of the people who come through this house play a part. They say what they think I want to hear." "And me?" she asked. He glanced up. "You keep saying what I don't want to hear. That's rarer than you think." The lights flickered. Once. Twice. The storm grumbled closer, rattling the window panes. Mercer's gaze drifted upward, as if he could hear something moving through the walls. The moment stretched long and taut. "Finally," he said quietly, almost to himself, "this house tests everyone who enters." Then his eyes found hers again, cold and searching. "Let's see if it finds your limits too." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the glass. And for the first time, Nia understood that his tests had nothing to do with obedience. They were about how much of herself she'd be willing to reveal before dawn. The lights went out all at once. The lamps, the chandeliers, even the faint hum of the refrigerator in the distant kitchen, all silenced. For a moment, the Mercer estate seemed to inhale. Then thunder split the night in two. Nia froze. The fire in the study flickered weakly, its glow licking at the glass walls like a heartbeat. Shadows moved differently now, longer, heavier. "Power lines," she murmured. The storm had been growing worse for hours, but somehow she hadn't expected it to reach in here, into the marble and steel sanctuary of the billionaire who could buy and sell a city. When she turned, Elias Mercer was gone. The decanter he'd poured from moments ago still sat on the table, but he had vanished without sound, leaving only the echo of his voice. "This house tests everyone who enters." Nia swallowed against the sudden quiet. She stood, brushing her palms on her uniform. The silence pressed in again. Maybe he'd gone to reset the generator. Maybe this was part of the test. She hated how easily she believed that now. The storm hissed against the glass walls, waves of rain blurring the view of the cliffside below. Beyond that was only the sea, wild, dark, endless. Her reflection shimmered in the window, faintly illuminated by the dying fire. Behind her, the house stretched into hallways and doors she'd never seen open. Something about that bothered her. When she'd first arrived months ago, she'd been told which rooms to clean and which to ignore. The West Wing was off limits. Mercer's orders. And now, with the power gone and the master himself nowhere to be found, that same wing seemed to call to her. A low creak echoed from the hallway. She turned sharply, every muscle tightening. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. More like something settling, breathing. "Mr. Mercer," she called softly. No answer. The air was colder as she stepped into the corridor. The firelight behind her dwindled with every step, replaced by the pulse of lightning through the windows. The long stretch of hallway looked endless, lined with doors, each one shut tight. As she passed, she noticed the handles. Brass ornate, all the same, except one. Halfway down the corridor stood a single door with a darker handle, almost black, its metal worn smooth. She remembered it instantly. During her first week, she'd asked the head housekeeper why that door was always locked. The woman's face had paled. Because Mr. Mercer said so. Then, when she'd pushed, foolishly curious, the woman had whispered, "It's not the door that's locked, dear. It's what's behind it." Now, standing before it, Nia felt the words crawl up her spine. Another flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, and in that split second of light, she could swear she saw movement behind the door. A shadow. Or a trick of her imagination. Then came the sound. Faint. Fragile. Impossible. Music. It drifted through the wood. A soft, lilting tune played on something like a music box. Slow, sweet, and heartbreakingly familiar. A lullaby. Nia's breath caught. Every instinct told her to turn back. But something else, something deeper, urged her forward. The same strange pull she'd felt all night, as if the house itself wanted her to see. She reached for the handle. It was cold against her skin. The door gave with a whispering sigh. The scent hit her first. Not decay, but time. Stale perfume, old dust, and something softer. Baby powder, faint and ghostly. The room beyond was frozen in another life. A rocking horse stood near the window, its paint faded. A small dresser lined with picture books leaned against the far wall. Toys lay scattered across a rug whose colors had long since dulled. But it was the crib that stopped her. Inside, a thin film of dust covered a neatly folded blanket. On top of it sat a small gold ring, dulled with age. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. The initials engraved inside read, E.R.M. Elias Ravencourt Mercer. The lullaby continued, playing from an old music box on a shelf. Its ballerina twirled weakly, her arm broken, but the tune still spun on, relentless and soft. Nia's throat tightened. She glanced around the room and saw a child's drawing taped to the wall. A family, 3 figures holding hands beneath the sun. The tallest had dark hair. The smallest held a balloon. A thunderclap shook the house. Behind her, the door slammed shut. Nia spun and froze. Elias Mercer stood in the doorway, the stormlight slicing across his face. His eyes, sharp glacial blue, looked almost unhuman in the dark. "I told you," he said, voice low and trembling with fury, "never to come in here." Her pulse roared in her ears. I didn't mean." "You opened it." He stepped closer, and for a heartbeat she thought he might grab her. But then she saw it, the crack in his mask. Not rage. Not control. Something else. Pain. Deep and raw. He stared past her, to the crib, to the ring glinting in her hand. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Put that down." She did. Slowly. The music box wound down with a faint click, and the silence it left behind was unbearable. Nia found her voice. "This was your son's room." He didn't answer. "Your wife's too," she said quietly. "Wasn't it?" The air between them felt fragile, like glass under pressure. Then softer. "You live here like a ghost, Mr. Mercer. Maybe this house isn't haunted by them." Her voice wavered but held. "It's haunted by you." The words hung in the air, shattering something unseen. Mercer's expression collapsed. The fury drained from him all at once, leaving only exhaustion, a man hollowed out by grief. He looked at the crib again, as if seeing it for the first time. "It was raining that night too," he said quietly. "Just like this." Nia didn't move. "I was driving," he went on. "We argued. I lost control of the car on the cliff road. They said it was an accident. But it wasn't. It was anger. My anger." The confession came out in pieces, jagged and soft. "I built this house after," he said. "Thought I could fill it with glass and light to keep the darkness out. But all I did was trap it inside." He sank into the small rocking chair, staring at the dust gathering on its arms. "I come here sometimes, when I can't sleep. I tell myself I can still hear him. My boy. Laughing." His voice cracked. "But it's just this damned music box." Nia didn't speak. She knelt beside the crib, eyes stinging. Outside, thunder rolled again, but softer now. Distant, almost forgiving. When she finally looked up, Elias Mercer's gaze was fixed on her. For the first time, she saw no power in it. Only a man broken open. Now you know, he said quietly, why I keep everyone out. Nia rose slowly. Maybe that's the problem. The lullaby ended. The final note trembled and vanished into the storm. And for the first time since she'd entered the Mercer estate, the house truly fell silent. The storm had dulled to a low, steady hum by the time they left the nursery. But the silence that followed was heavier than the thunder ever was. Elias Mercer walked ahead, a shadow cut against the dim corridor light. His posture, once stiff and imperious, now looked deflated. Human. The flickering candles they'd lit to guide their way trembled in their holders, painting him in uneven gold and gray. Nia followed quietly, clutching the small lantern he'd handed her. She didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice not to shake. He stopped at the end of the hall, near the grand staircase, and leaned against the railing. The sea roared somewhere beyond the glass, the dark waves thrashing at the cliffs. Finally, he said it. You're not the first, you know. Nia blinked. The first what? He looked out over the foyer, his tone flat. The first one I've tested. Her chest tightened. You mean the stay through the night thing? A bitter smile ghosted across his lips. Yes. The deal. The challenge. The so-called test. He turned toward her then, eyes glinting in the half-light. I've done this before. Many times, actually. With staff. Consultants. Guests who thought they could handle me. She frowned. Handle you. The silence, he said simply. The isolation. Me. He pushed off the railing and began pacing, slow and deliberate. I needed to know why they couldn't last. Why people always left. I gave them comfort, money, power, whatever they wanted. But one by one, they all found an excuse to leave before dawn. He stopped, facing her fully. Do you want to know what they said? Nia nodded, though she wasn't sure she did. They said this house felt wrong, he murmured. That it pressed on their chest. That the silence was unbearable. That it was unbearable. His voice cracked faintly on the last word, and that, more than the confession itself, broke something open in her. She stepped closer, studying his face. Beneath the hard lines and gray edges of exhaustion, there was a boy who never got to stop mourning. Maybe they didn't fail your test, she said softly. Maybe your test failed them. Mercer's gaze snapped to her, sharp again. What do you mean by that? I mean, she said carefully, you're not testing people, you're punishing them. For leaving you. For not knowing how to live in your prison of glass and guilt. He scoffed. That's presumptuous, Miss Brooks. Maybe. But I'm not wrong. Lightning flared across the windows, slicing his face in half, the man and the shadow he'd become. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. You talk like you know what guilt costs. Her jaw tightened. I know what it costs to carry something you can't fix. He studied her, tilting his head slightly, like he was dissecting her words. You mean your mother? She flinched. How do you? I make it a point to know who works for me, he interrupted. You're paying off her hospital debt. Supporting your sister. You think I didn't notice the extra shifts? The missing hours of sleep? The words landed like blows. You think poverty makes you pure? He asked quietly. It doesn't. It just makes you tired. Her throat burned. And you think money makes you wise? It doesn't. It just gives you more places to hide. The air between them snapped taut, like an electric wire stretched too thin. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Nia's voice dropped, low and trembling. You keep testing people to see who'll stay. But maybe the only person who can't stand you is you. His expression faltered, just barely. enough to make her heart hammer harder. And then, finally, he broke. Mercer turned away, dragging a hand down his face. "You're infuriating," he muttered. She almost smiled. "So I've been told." He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Almost. They stood there in the half-darkness, the storm still grumbling outside. Then, without a word, he crossed the hall to a small sideboard and retrieved a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to her. "Against the rules?" she asked. "Maybe I'm changing them," he replied. The amber liquid burned her throat in a way that felt honest. She coughed once, then took another sip. They sat opposite each other on the floor of the study, the firelight low and restless. For the first time that night, the silence wasn't cruel. It was full. He stared into the flames, the reflection turning his eyes molten. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think if I kept working, kept building, it would drown out the guilt. But all it did was make the silence louder." Nia nodded. "Works like that. It feels like healing until you stop moving." He smirked faintly. "When did you get so wise?" "When I didn't have the luxury of being foolish." He chuckled under his breath. "Touché." They shared the whiskey in silence for a while. He told her about the early days, how his company started in a garage, how he met his wife at a fundraiser, how their son used to climb the staircase rails like a daredevil. His voice softened when he spoke of them. And Nia, in turn, told him about her mother. The night the diagnosis came, the first bill she couldn't pay, the way her little sister slept with the lights on after their father left. By the time the bottle was half empty, something had shifted. The air between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was fragile, uncertain. Mercer leaned back against the wall, his face lit in gold and shadow. "You're not what I expected, Miss Brooks." She arched a brow. "What did you expect?" "A servant," he said. "Not a mirror." Nia looked into her glass, then met his gaze. "Mirrors don't lie. That's why people hate them." He held her eyes a beat too long, and for a heartbeat she saw the man he might have been before the tragedy. The one who could still smile. And he almost did. But then lightning tore through the night, a violent crack that rattled the entire house. The window nearest them shattered inward, glass spraying across the floor. Both flinched back, the whiskey tumbling from Nia's hand. Then came the shrill, mechanical wail of the mansion's alarm system. Red lights flickered along the ceiling. Mercer was already on his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Basement breach. The storms hit the lower level." Nia rose, heart pounding. "What does that mean?" He turned to her, eyes cold steel again. The connection they'd shared a moment ago vanished behind the mask of command. "It means," he said grimly, "the real test just began." The mansion screamed. Sirens wailed through the hallways, their red pulse cutting through the dark. The storm outside had turned violent, shaking the glass walls as if the sea itself were trying to claw its way inside. Nia followed Mercer down the staircase, her shoes slipping on wet marble. "What's happening?" she shouted over the alarms. "Flood breach," he barked, striding toward a locked door at the end of the corridor. "The retaining pumps must have failed. The basement's taking on water." "The basement. It's where I keep the archive, the original Mercer files, prototypes, patents." His voice dropped. "And my son's last project." Nia's chest tightened, remembering the nursery. The dust, the toys, the ghost of a family. "Then let me help." He spun on her. "No. Stay here." "Like hell." Before he could argue, she grabbed a flashlight from the wall unit and followed him through the security door. The air hit them like ice. A metallic tang filled her lungs as they descended the narrow staircase. The lower level of the estate stretched wide, a labyrinth of glass vaults, steel cabinets, and servers. It was meant to be impenetrable. But water doesn't ask permission. It was already pooling across the floor, a thin, shimmering layer that reflected the emergency lights like blood. Mercer waded forward, the hem of his trousers darkening. There's a control room. If I can reach it. A loud crack cut through his words. The foundation groaned. The flood was finding new paths. Nia hurried after him, her flashlight beam slicing through the dim. What are we looking for? 3 data drives, he said tightly. Labeled M1 through M3. If I lose them, I lose what's left of my family. He said it like a confession, like the truth itself hurt to speak. The water deepened to her knees, icy and black. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking dust from the ceiling vents. Elias, she shouted. You can't do this alone. I've been doing everything alone for years. He snapped back. Yeah, and look how that turned out. He froze at that, eyes flashing. For a moment, she thought he'd tell her to leave again. Instead, he looked away, jaw tight, and pushed forward. They reached the far wall where a glass case stood, half submerged, alarm lights flickering. Mercer reached into his pocket and pulled out a keycard. The lock beeped, then sparked violently. Systems fried, Nia said. I can override it manually, he muttered, dropping to one knee beside a panel. His hands moved quickly, precise even in panic. The water was climbing faster now. Ankles, shins, thighs. Nia glanced behind them. The staircase they'd come down was already a river. The house was drowning. She turned back just as Mercer pried the panel loose. Wires sparked, lighting his face in strobing flashes. He reached in, twisted 2 connections, and the glass door hissed open. Inside were 3 black drives sealed in waterproof casings. He grabbed them, clutching them to his chest like fragile life itself. Got them, he breathed. Then let's go. But the ceiling above them shuddered, then split with a roar. A wooden beam, swollen with rain, crashed down. Nia dove aside, the impact throwing her against a filing cabinet. When she looked up, Elias Mercer was pinned. He was half submerged now, one beam across his torso, another pressing against his leg. The drives had scattered into the dark water. Elias. He gritted his teeth, trying to push free, but the debris held fast. Get out, he rasped. Now. Not without you. That's an order. Then fire me, she shouted back, already wading toward him. He grabbed her wrist as she reached him, his grip cold and desperate. The deal's done, Nia. You made it through the night. You're free. Go. She met his eyes, those same blue steel eyes that had terrified her hours ago. But now they were human, full of something raw and pleading. I don't want your freedom, she said quietly. Not like this. He blinked, as if the words didn't make sense. You'll drown. Then we drown together. She shoved his hand away and ducked beneath the beam. The water was up to her chest now, freezing her lungs with every breath. Her fingers found a crowbar floating near the stairs, probably dislodged from a maintenance kit. She wedged it under the beam and heaved. Nothing. Her muscles screamed in protest. Stop, he coughed. You'll. She ignored him. Tried again. The metal groaned, the pressure biting into her palms. Come on, she muttered through gritted teeth. Come on. A crack echoed through the basement. The beam shifted slightly, then jammed again. Almost, she gasped. Almost there. Mercer tried to push upward with her, his face pale, water lapping at his chin. Nia. The sound of something snapping filled the air, the crowbar, the beam, maybe both, and suddenly it gave way. Elias Mercer lunged forward, gasping as the water swallowed them both. They went under together. For a moment, there was only darkness. Cold and crushing. Nia couldn't tell which way was up. She kicked wildly, lungs burning, searching for light, for air. Her hand brushed something solid. His arm. She grabbed it and pulled with everything she had. They broke the surface in tandem, choking, gasping. "Move!" she shouted, shoving him toward the stairs. The current tugged at their legs, dragging them backward, but she fought it, one step at a time, her muscles shaking. They climbed together, crawled, stumbled until they reached the top step. The alarms were still screaming, red lights flashing like a heartbeat gone wrong. Mercer collapsed against the wall, water streaming from his hair and clothes. He coughed hard, one hand pressed to his ribs. Nia slumped beside him, her breath ragged. The adrenaline had left her shaking. For a long moment neither spoke. Just the sound of rain hammering against glass and the distant churn of the ocean. Finally, he turned his head toward her. "You should have left me." She met his gaze, eyes steady. "I don't abandon broken things." The words hung there, sharp and quiet, cutting through the noise. Something in his face, something hardened, cracked open. He reached out, hesitant, his hand trembling before it fell to the floor. "You did the unthinkable," he whispered. Nia didn't answer. They sat there, two soaked, breathless strangers, while the storm howled around them, the mansion groaning like a wounded beast. And though neither said it aloud, both knew, nothing between them would ever be the same again. The storm had passed. The mansion no longer screamed. It only breathed, slowly, heavily, like a wounded creature trying to remember it was still alive. Nia sat on the front steps of the Mercer estate, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and sea salt. Her hair was still damp, the ends curling against her cheeks. Beyond the cliffside, the ocean rolled in slow, lazy swells under a sky the color of pale gold. The rhythmic hum of generators filled the air. Flashing red and blue lights washed across the manicured driveway as emergency crews moved in and out of the house. Someone shouted for a water pump. Another hauled sandbags toward the broken glass doors. None of it felt real. Nia's hands were raw, her knuckles split and bruised. She kept staring at them, the same hands that scrubbed toilets, that mopped marble floors, that had somehow lifted a beam off a man worth billions. Her world had shifted overnight. She just didn't know where it had landed. A voice broke through the quiet. "They say the foundation's secure." Nia looked up. Elias Mercer stood a few steps away, his shirt torn, his face pale beneath the grime. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in weight. As if the storm had taken something out of him that he'd never get back. "You should be resting," she said, her voice hoarse. "I could say the same." He came closer, then stopped beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them felt different now, no longer sharp or oppressive, just honest. Finally he said, "You didn't have to save me." She turned to look at him. "You keep saying that like it would have made sense to let you drown. It would have made sense to save yourself." "I did." The words caught him off guard. His head tilted slightly, studying her. Nia shrugged beneath the blanket. "You think saving you wasn't saving myself? You don't get it, Elias. You live your life like people are disposable, like everything's a transaction. But sometimes doing the right thing is its own kind of freedom." He looked down at her hands, at the cuts and bruises she hadn't bothered to bandage yet. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why risk that? After everything I said, everything I did." Her voice softened. "Because broken things still matter." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the distant crash of waves. Then his jaw flexed, and his eyes darted away, as though the words had struck something too deep to face directly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. When he held it out to her, she recognized it instantly. A check embossed with the Mercer insignia. $1 million, he said. As promised. Nia stared at it, unmoving. You're serious. You earned it. The deal was to make it through the night. She gave a small, humorless laugh. I didn't think make it through meant nearly drowning. Neither did I. When she didn't reach for the check, he placed it beside her on the step. The crisp white of the paper looked obscene against her soaked blanket. He sat beside her again, elbows resting on his knees. The early light hit his profile, turning his silver-streaked hair to gold. For the first time, he didn't look like the Ice King. He just looked tired. I've spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from me, he said quietly. Contracts, investments, access. Even my grief became currency. Nia glanced at him. And what do you think I want? He smiled faintly. That's just it. I don't know. Maybe that's the point, she said. Not everything has to be about what someone wants. Sometimes it's about what they deserve. His expression softened, the walls around his voice cracking again. You deserve better than this life, Nia. Better than debt and double shifts and a boss who treats you like a pawn in some twisted experiment. She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her blanket. Maybe. But I also deserve to choose where I go next, even if that's not the fairy tale ending you're used to writing. He gave a small nod, eyes distant. Then I suppose this is goodbye. Nia reached for the check finally, her fingers brushing against the paper. It felt light, too light for what it represented. She turned it over, saw his signature, and something in her chest tightened. This covers the debt, he said softly. Your mother's hospital. Your sister's tuition. You can start over. Start over, she echoed, testing the words on her tongue. They felt foreign, almost fictional. He stood then, running a hand through his hair. There's a release form inside. My attorney will need your signature. Standard procedure. Of course. As she rose to her feet, the blanket slid from her shoulders. The wind caught her damp curls, tossing them into the sunlight. She followed him back into the house, the once mighty fortress now a ruin of glass and silence. The living room smelled of salt and smoke. On the dining table sat a single document beside a fountain pen. Mercer gestured toward it without meeting her eyes. Nia signed her name slowly, each stroke deliberate. With every letter she felt something close, a chapter, a wound, maybe both. When she set the pen down, she said, So that's it. You erase my debt, I erase your guilt. He met her gaze at last. I don't think it's that easy for either of us. Their eyes held, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. Something fragile, real, and impossible to name. Then she folded the check, slipped it into her pocket, and turned toward the open doors. The morning light spilled across the marble like a promise. Nia, he called after her. She paused, half-turned. Why did you really stay? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because someone had to prove you were still human. And then she walked away, out of the house, out of his shadow, into the sunlight rising over the cliffs. The air was cold, the world quiet, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was free. Free but heavy-hearted. The city had its own kind of silence. Harsher, more mechanical than the seas. It came between the hum of traffic and the faint rattle of the old radiator in Nia's apartment, a quiet that carried the weight of everything she'd tried to leave behind. It had been 3 weeks since the night at Mercer Estate. 3 weeks since the storm, the flood, the moment she thought she'd lost him, and the moment she'd found something in herself she didn't know existed. Now, her life was supposed to be different. It was, in all the practical ways that mattered. The check had cleared. The hospital bills were gone. Her mother finally resting in a private care facility instead of a crowded ward. Her little sister, Tasha, had tuition paid through the next 2 years. Freedom. That was what he'd promised. And yet, every night when she closed her eyes, she heard water. The rush of it rising in the dark. His voice, low and breaking through the chaos. Go. Nia pressed her hands to her face and exhaled. The apartment was warm. The air thick with the smell of simmering stew she hadn't touched. On the counter sat unopened envelopes, some from banks, one from a hospital administrator offering congratulations, and one, larger, heavier, marked with a wax seal. She'd been staring at that one for hours. When she finally opened it, the letterhead read, Mercer and Feldman Legal Group. Her stomach tightened. To Ms. Nia Brooks. Per the wishes of Mr. Elias Mercer, enclosed you will find documentation establishing the Brooks Initiative, a philanthropic foundation dedicated to youth mentorship and community rebuilding projects. Mr. Mercer has requested that you be listed as both co-founder and honorary director. Further correspondence and financial documentation will be arranged at your discretion. Respectfully, Jonathan Feldman, Senior Counsel. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded the letter again. The paper was thick, expensive, just like everything that came from his world. The Brooks Initiative. Her name, bound to his legacy. For a long time she sat there, the city lights flickering through the curtains. Then, almost without realizing it, she reached for her coat. If ghosts wouldn't leave her alone, maybe it was time she went back to where they lived. The road to the Mercer estate twisted along the cliffs like a scar. The storm's damage had been mostly cleared, though the scent of salt and damp earth lingered in the air. When the iron gates came into view, they stood open, as if expecting her. She drove through slowly, her small sedan dwarfed by the mansion's shadow. The house looked different now, emptier though restored. Glass replaced, walls repainted. But something in its bones still remembered the night it nearly drowned. Nia parked and stepped out. Her shoes clicked softly against the stone path as she approached the front doors. Inside, the air was cold and still. She half expected his voice to echo from the stairway, sharp and distant. Miss Brooks. But the only sound was the soft hum of distant machinery. She walked past the grand staircase, down the hall lined with portraits, to the study where it had all begun. The room had been cleaned, but not changed. The same desk, the same storm-gray walls. The painting she'd damaged was gone. In its place hung a photograph, Mercer with his wife and young son, smiling under a summer sky. Nia stood before it for a long time. The boy had Elias's eyes. She pulled the folded check from her pocket. It was wrinkled now, edges worn from being carried too long. She placed it gently on the desk. I never wanted your money, she said softly, though the room didn't answer. I just wanted to stop feeling like I owed someone my life. Her voice faltered. And you wanted to stop feeling like you owed anyone yours. She turned toward the door but froze when she saw him standing there. Elias Mercer. Not the ghost she'd imagined, but not the same man either. His posture was less rigid, his eyes clearer. He wore no suit, just a black sweater and dark jeans, like a man still learning how to be ordinary. I didn't think you'd come, he said quietly. I didn't think I would either. His gaze flicked to the check on the desk. You didn't have to return that. I know, she said. But I can't keep it. You gave it to a girl who didn't believe she had choices. I'm not her anymore. Something flickered in his expression. Admiration, maybe sorrow. You earned it. Maybe. But what I needed wasn't money. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Then what was it? Nia met his gaze. To be seen. To see you. The air between them felt fragile like glass. For a moment, neither moved. Then he said, "The foundation, it's real. I wanted to honor what you showed me that night. What we both learned." Nia smiled faintly. "The Brooks Initiative. Sounds like a PR move." He actually laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Maybe it is. But it's also a promise. To build something that matters. Without buying forgiveness. Without running from it," he said. They stood there, facing each other across the room that had once been filled with stormlight and fury. Now it was just two people. No longer master and maid, no longer the Ice King and the Invisible Girl. Just survivors. She walked toward the door, stopping beside him. "Goodbye, Elias." "Goodbye, Nia." As she stepped out into the hallway, the morning light cut through the tall windows, scattering across the polished floor. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. Maybe ghosts don't leave easily because they're waiting for the living to let them go. She looked back once, catching a final glimpse of him standing in the doorway, the photograph behind him glowing in the sunlight. Then she smiled, a quiet, resolute smile, and walked out into the crisp air. The sea roared below the cliffs, endless and alive. Freedom didn't feel like escape anymore. It felt like peace. The next time Nia saw the Mercer estate, it was no longer a house of glass. The storm had stripped it bare, but from the wreckage, something new had begun to take shape. The shattered windows were gone, replaced with tall panes that caught the morning sun instead of the lightning. The grand hall, once echoing with ghosts, now rang faintly with the hum of machinery and the sound of workers' voices. Where there had been vaults, there were blueprints. Where there had been silence, there was life. Elias Mercer stood at the center of it all. He looked different. Gone was the man carved from ice and guilt. His hair was still silvered at the edges, his posture still sharp, but there was warmth now, a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there before. The man who'd once hid behind marble walls now walked among scaffolds and tool carts, sleeves rolled, hands scarred from real work. When he saw her at the entrance, he paused mid-conversation and dismissed the foreman with a nod. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people bound by one long night neither could forget. "You came back," he said softly. "I heard about what you're building." He smiled faintly. "A rumor, then. Not my favorite medium. I needed to see for myself." He gestured for her to follow, leading her down a corridor that smelled faintly of fresh paint and sawdust. The floorboards gleamed, newly polished but still bearing faint water stains from the flood, a reminder left deliberately, she realized. "These rooms used to be storage," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. "Now they'll be classrooms. Art, science, mentorship programs. We're calling it the Brooks Foundation." She stopped walking. "You're serious?" "I don't do irony well, Miss Brooks." Her lips twitched at that. "You really want to name it after me?" "It wasn't my idea," he admitted. "The lawyer thought it would look better than the Mercer Reformation Fund." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're terrible at pretending humility." He turned, and the light caught the faintest trace of amusement in his eyes. "You taught me the difference between pretending and trying." They reached what had once been the flooded basement. Now it was stripped down to its bones. Pipes exposed, walls half-painted, the faint smell of plaster and hope clinging to the air. Children's drawings were already taped to one section of the wall. Crayon suns, stick figures, and crooked hearts. Nia stared at them, her throat tightening. "You started letting them in already?" "Just a few. Local schools. Some kids from foster programs. They needed a place to go. Turns out I needed one too." There was silence between them. Soft, fragile, real. Finally, he spoke again. Do you ever think about that night? Every day, she admitted. Not because of the storm or the fear, but because of what it showed me. He turned toward her, waiting. She looked around the rebuilt space, the foundation of what was once his prison. You can't buy redemption, Mr. Mercer, she said quietly. You build it. One act at a time. He took in her words like a man tasting something new. Then maybe you should help me build it. Her head snapped up. What? The foundation, he said simply. You. Me. Co-founders. Directors. She blinked. You want me to work for you again? No, his voice softened. I want to work with you. The distinction lingered in the air. She folded her arms, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You realize how insane that sounds? A billionaire and a maid running a youth foundation together. Not a maid, he said. Not anymore. Nia turned away, staring at the far wall where sunlight filtered through the high windows. Dust swirled in the air like ghosts made of gold. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away and never look back. She'd already earned her freedom, hadn't she? But freedom, she'd learned, wasn't always distance. Sometimes it was direction. She thought of her sister, of her mother's tired smile when the bills were finally gone. She thought of every time she'd been told she didn't belong in rooms like this. And she thought of this house, the place that once caged a broken man, becoming a home for others who'd been told the same lie. When she finally turned to face him, her eyes were steady. If I do this, it's not your project anymore. It's ours. And it doesn't start with a name, it starts with the people we serve. His mouth curved in a small, sincere smile. Agreed. She extended her hand. Then let's rebuild it right. He took it without hesitation. His grip was firm, warm, not the grasp of a man giving orders, but of someone finally learning what partnership felt like. They stood that way for a long moment, sunlight pooling around them, washing over the unfinished room. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like a monument to loss. It felt alive. Later, as they walked back toward the main hall, the distant sound of children's laughter echoed faintly from outside, the pilot group exploring the grounds. Nia smiled. You let them run through the gardens? He shrugged. I figured the place could use a little chaos. Besides, the roses are overrated. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You really have changed. No, he said. I'm still me. I've just stopped pretending that was enough. They paused by the front doors, where the sunlight poured in. For a heartbeat, everything was quiet again. The kind of silence that wasn't hollow anymore but full. Nia looked out at the cliffs, the sea stretching far beyond them. You know, she said, I used to think freedom was about getting out, leaving the people who held you down. And now, he asked, now I think it's about choosing where to stand. And who to stand with. He nodded slowly. Then you're exactly where you're meant to be. For the first time since the night of the storm, Nia felt no weight pressing on her chest. No ghosts whispering from the walls. Just the sound of the sea below, the scent of paint and sunlight, and the promise of something being rebuilt, inside both of them. She exhaled softly. Let's get to work. And as she stepped forward into the light, Elias Mercer followed. Together they crossed the threshold, not as master and servant, but as architects of redemption. The mansion no longer looked like a fortress. A year had passed since the storm that nearly tore it apart, and in that year, the Mercer estate had become something else entirely. A beacon. The marble floors gleamed, the glass walls breathed light instead of swallowing it, and the air inside was filled with laughter. Real laughter. Children ran through the halls now, some from the city, some from shelters, some from neighborhoods that had never known places like this existed. The Brooks Foundation had turned the once haunted house into a haven of second chances. And at the center of it all stood Nia Brooks, no longer in uniform, no longer unseen. Her reflection stared back at her from the gleaming glass doors as the sound of cameras and murmured anticipation swelled behind her. She smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer, still not used to how natural it felt to wear something tailored, and turned as a voice called her name. Ms. Brooks. The ceremony's ready to begin. A young assistant waved from the stage at the far end of the hall, where microphones stood waiting. Rows of reporters, city officials, and local families filled the space where opulence used to be the only guest. At the edge of the stage, Elias Mercer waited. He looked almost unrecognizable from the man she'd met a year ago. The frost that once hardened his eyes had thawed. There was still gravity in his presence, but it was a warmer kind, the weight of a man who had learned to live with his ghosts instead of letting them rule him. When she joined him, he smiled. Not the forced, photo-ready kind, but a quiet, private curve of the mouth that meant we made it. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for a year," she said. He nodded, stepping aside as the announcer introduced her. "Please welcome Ms. Nia Brooks, co-founder and director of the Brooks Foundation." Applause rippled through the hall. Nia took a breath, stepped up to the podium, and looked out over the crowd. A sea of faces looked back, some curious, some inspired, some skeptical. The same kind of faces that used to pass her in stores without seeing her at all. For a moment she froze. Then she remembered the night everything changed. The rain pounding on the glass, Mercer's cold voice, her own trembling hands refusing to give up. And she began to speak. "When I first came here," she said, her voice steady but soft, "this house was silent. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also hollow. Every room carried an echo of something lost. Back then, I was just a maid. My world was survival. Paying hospital bills, making rent, keeping my sister in school. I thought freedom meant escape. But a man, one I never expected to understand, told me, 'Make it through one night and I'll set you free.'" A few quiet chuckles rippled through the audience. Nia smiled faintly, the memory as vivid as thunder. "That night didn't give me freedom," she continued. "It gave me courage. Because freedom isn't always about leaving. Sometimes it's about staying, and changing the place that tried to break you." She glanced at Mercer then, and though he stood still, there was emotion flickering behind his calm facade. "This foundation isn't about wealth," she said. "It's about worth. It's about reminding every kid who walks through those doors that they are more than the world's expectations of them. That they can make it through the night, too, whatever their night looks like, and come out stronger for it." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real. A sound built not from spectacle, but from truth. Nia's throat tightened. She stepped back from the microphone, nodding once in gratitude, then returned to Mercer's side. He leaned close, his voice just above a whisper. "You always did have a better way with words. Don't tell me you're getting sentimental," she teased. He smiled, eyes softening. "Maybe I'm just realizing how right you were. You can't buy redemption. You build it." Nia turned to look at him fully. "You did that." He shook his head. "No. We did. But you did the unthinkable, Nia." Her brow furrowed slightly. "What's that?" "You made me believe again." Something in her chest loosened then, a knot she hadn't known she was still carrying. The applause still echoed faintly in the background, but all she could hear was the sincerity in his voice. For once, there was no wall between them. No test. No silence. Just two people who had both survived the storm and decided to build something from its wreckage. After the ceremony, the crowd filtered out into the gardens where a celebration had been arranged. Strings of lights glimmered overhead. The cliffside wind carried laughter and the faint scent of wild roses, the kind Mercer had once despised for being too delicate. Now, they lined the pathways in full bloom. Nia wandered to the edge of the terrace, overlooking the vast stretch of sea. The setting sun bled into the waves, painting the glass walls of the mansion gold. She could see her reflection there again, stronger, steadier, no longer the invisible girl with calloused hands and downcast eyes. Behind her, Mercer spoke briefly with reporters, his tone calm, his gaze proud when it drifted her way. She smiled to herself. For all his change, he still carried that air of quiet control, but now it served a purpose beyond his guilt. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. Watching the live stream. "You looked amazing, Nia. You did it." She typed back, "No, sis. We did." Sliding the phone away, she took a long breath of the sea air. The glass mansion that once trapped her was now filled with light, music, and laughter. Children's footsteps echoed across floors that had once known only the sound of her mop. Freedom, she realized, was never the prize. It wasn't what waited at the end of the night. It was what carried her through it. It was the courage to keep fighting, to rebuild, to believe. And for the first time in her life, Nia Brooks didn't feel like she was surviving anymore. She was home.
Thank you for watching this story. If this moved you, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the videos on your screen to watch more powerful stories just like these.